Hi, I'm Bridget Thompson, and I'm 32 years old. I live in a small apartment in Portland, Oregon, working as a freelance graphic designer while trying to make ends meet. I guess you could say I'm the black sheep of the Thompson family. At least that's how it's always felt. While my older brother Marcus became a successful investment banker in New York, and my younger sister Caroline married well and lives in a mansion in Connecticut, I chose the creative path that never quite satisfied my parents' expectations. The October rain was hammering against the windows of our family home in suburban Seattle when I arrived for what I thought would be just another tense family dinner. The Victorian house where I grew up looked the same as always. Perfectly manicured lawn, pristine white picket fence, and my mother's prized rose garden, though the flowers had long since withered in the autumn chill. Dad had been battling lung cancer for 8 months, and the treatments were taking their toll. Mom had called earlier that week, her voice strained with exhaustion, asking if I could come home for dinner. "Your father wants to talk to all of us," she'd said, and something in her tone made my stomach clench with worry. I knocked on the familiar oak door, and Mom opened it with that tight smile she reserved for difficult conversations. Her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she wore her favorite navy cardigan, the one she always reached for when she needed armor against the world. "Bridget, honey, come in. You look thin. Are you eating enough?" She pulled me into a brief hug that felt more obligatory than warm. "I'm fine, Mom. How's Dad today?" "He's having a good day. Marcus and Caroline are already here." I could hear familiar voices from the dining room. Marcus's confident laugh and Caroline's animated chatter about her twins' latest achievements. The house smelled like Mom's pot roast, a scent that should have been comforting but somehow felt heavy with unspoken tension. Walking into the dining room felt like entering a courtroom where I was already guilty. Marcus stood by the window, his expensive suit making him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. At 35, he had that polished success that came with corner offices and six-figure bonuses. Caroline, 29 and eternally optimistic, was showing Mom pictures on her phone while her husband David nodded politely. "Bridget!" Caroline jumped up to hug me, her designer dress and pearl necklace a stark contrast to my vintage jeans and thrift store sweater. "You look great. How's the art thing going?" "It's graphic design, Caroline. And it's going fine." Dad entered from the kitchen, moving slowly but with determination. At 68, Robert Thompson had always been an imposing figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, with steel-gray eyes that missed nothing. The cancer had stolen some of his strength, but his presence still commanded attention. "Good. We're all here," he said, settling into his chair at the head of the table. "Let's eat first, then we'll talk." Dinner was a careful dance of small talk and avoided subjects. Marcus talked about his latest merger. Caroline shared updates about her volunteer work at the country club. And I mostly listened, feeling like an observer in my own family's story. Dad ate little, pushing food around his plate while Mom watched him with worried eyes. When Mom brought out her famous apple pie, Dad cleared his throat. "I need to discuss something with all of you. Something important." The room went quiet, except for the rain against the windows. Mom's hand trembled slightly as she set down the pie server. "I've been working with our lawyer, Mr. Henderson, on updating my will," Dad began, his voice steady but tired. "With everything that's happening with my health, I want to make sure everything is in order." Marcus leaned forward, his business instincts kicking in. "That's smart, Dad. What do you need from us?" Dad's eyes moved around the table, lingering on each of us. When his gaze reached me, I saw something that might have been regret, but it passed too quickly for me to be sure. "I want you all to know that I've made my decisions carefully. Marcus, you'll inherit the house and the majority of the investments. You've always been responsible with money, and I trust you to handle things properly." Marcus nodded, though I noticed he didn't look entirely comfortable with the attention. "Caroline, you'll receive your grandmother's jewelry and a substantial trust fund for the twins' education. I know how much family traditions mean to you." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy, that's so generous, but..." He held up a hand. "Let me finish." His eyes turned to me and I felt my heart start to race. "Bridget, I've thought long and hard about this. Your choices, your lifestyle. I can't in good conscience leave you a large inheritance that might enable more poor decisions." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at him, unable to process what I was hearing. "I'm sorry, but there's nothing left for you in the will." I hope you understand that this is for your own good." The room spun around me. Caroline gasped, and even Marcus looked shocked. Mom's face had gone pale, but she didn't contradict him. "Nothing?" I whispered. "Dad, I don't understand. What poor decisions. I'm making an honest living. I'm not on drugs. I'm not—" "You're 32 years old, Bridget. You live in a studio apartment. You can barely pay your bills, and you've never shown any interest in building a real future. I won't enable that anymore." I felt tears burning my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of everyone. "I see," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange and distant. The silence stretched on forever. Caroline started to say something, but David put a gentle hand on her arm. Marcus stared at his hands, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. "I think I should go," I said, standing on shaky legs. "Bridget, wait." Caroline started, but I was already moving toward the door. "Thank you for dinner, Mom. It was illuminating." I grabbed my coat from the hall closet and walked out into the rain, feeling like I was sleepwalking through someone else's nightmare. The cold October air hit my face, mixing with the tears I could no longer hold back. As I sat in my car in the driveway, watching the warm light spill from the windows of the house where I'd grown up, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. My phone buzzed with a text from Caroline. "I'm so sorry. This isn't right. Call me tomorrow." But I wasn't ready to talk to anyone. I needed time to process what had just happened, to figure out how to rebuild my relationship with my family, or if that was even possible. I drove home through the rain, my mind replaying Dad's words over and over. "Nothing left for you." It felt like more than just money. It felt like he was telling me there was nothing left of our relationship, nothing left of his faith in me, nothing left of the little girl who used to sit on his lap while he read bedtime stories. That night, I lay awake in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering if I really was as much of a disappointment as he seemed to think. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was just drifting through life without any real purpose or direction. But as the rain continued to fall against my windows, something else began to grow alongside the hurt and confusion, a small, stubborn spark of determination. I might not have my family's approval or their money, but I had something else. My own strength, my own dreams, and my own definition of what success looked like. I just didn't know yet how much that would matter in the days to come. 3 weeks passed after that horrible dinner, and I threw myself into work with a determination I hadn't felt in years. Maybe Dad was right about my lack of direction, but I was going to prove him wrong about everything else. I took on every freelance project I could find, working 16-hour days designing logos for small businesses, creating websites for local nonprofits, and even doing some illustrations for a children's book publisher. My studio apartment in Portland's Pearl District became my fortress. I'd moved the couch to make room for a proper workspace, hung my best designs on the walls, and turned the place into a creative sanctuary. The November rain created a constant soundtrack against the windows, and I found comfort in the rhythmic sound as I worked late into the night. Caroline had called several times, but I wasn't ready to talk. Marcus had sent a brief text. "Sorry about dinner. Call if you need anything." I appreciated the gesture, but I knew he was probably relieved about the inheritance situation. He'd always been Dad's favorite, and now it was official. I was deep in concentration, working on a branding project for a local coffee shop, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Seattle area code. "Hello? Ms. Thompson? This is James Henderson from Henderson & Associates. I was your father's attorney." My heart skipped. Was. Past tense. "Mr. Henderson is my father. I'm very sorry to inform you that your father passed away peacefully in his sleep last night. Your mother asked me to contact you." I sank into my chair, the words hitting me like a physical blow. Even though we'd known this day was coming, even though our last conversation had been so painful, losing him felt like losing a part of myself. Thank you for calling. When is the funeral?" "The service is planned for Friday at St. Mark's Presbyterian. But Ms. Thompson, I'm actually calling about something else as well. I need to discuss your father's will with you." I almost laughed, but it came out as more of a sob. "I think my father made his feelings about that pretty clear, Mr. Henderson. Actually, that's what I need to talk to you about. There's been a development. Your father came to see me just 2 days ago, and he made some significant changes to his will. I felt the world tilt slightly. What kind of changes? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Would you be able to come to my office tomorrow, say, around 2 p.m.? Mr. Henderson, please, just tell me what's going on. There was a pause, and I could hear papers rustling. Your father left you a letter, Ms. Thompson. And he changed his will. Substantially. I was quiet for so long that he asked if I was still there. I'm here. I don't understand. 3 weeks ago, he told me there was nothing left for me. I know. I was there when he made that original will. But something changed his mind. He was very specific about wanting to make things right. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling like I was in some kind of alternate reality. Dad had changed his mind. What could have possibly made him reconsider? I called Caroline, and she answered on the first ring. Oh, Bridget, I'm so glad you called. Mom told me about Dad this morning. I'm so sorry. Caroline, did Dad say anything to you about changing his will? What? No. Why would he? Wait. What are you talking about? I told her about the lawyer's call, and she was quiet for a long moment. That's wonderful, Bridget. I mean, not wonderful about Dad, but about the will. I've been feeling sick about what happened at dinner. It wasn't fair. But why would he change his mind? We didn't speak after that night. I don't know, but maybe he realized he was being too harsh. You know how proud he was. Maybe he couldn't bring himself to call you directly. The next day, I drove to Seattle through a gray November morning that matched my mood. The city looked different somehow. Sharper, more real. Everything felt heightened, like I was seeing the world through a new lens. Henderson and Associates occupied the top floor of a downtown office building with a view of Elliott Bay. James Henderson was a distinguished man in his 60s, with kind eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put me at ease. Ms. Thompson, thank you for coming. First, let me express my condolences. Your father was a good man, and I know this is a difficult time. Thank you. Mr. Henderson, I need to understand what happened. 3 weeks ago, my father told me I was getting nothing. Now you're saying he changed his mind? Mr. Henderson opened a thick folder and pulled out a handwritten letter. He wanted you to read this first. My hands shook as I took the letter. Dad's familiar handwriting filled 3 pages of his personal stationery. My dear Bridget, it began. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope you can forgive an old man for his mistakes. The letter went on to explain that after our dinner, he'd spent sleepless nights thinking about what he'd said. He'd called my old art teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, who still worked at the high school. She'd told him about a scholarship fund I'd quietly established for students who couldn't afford art supplies, something I'd been doing for 3 years without telling anyone. I realized that I'd been measuring your success by my own narrow standards. The letter continued. You've built a life based on helping others and following your passion. That takes a different kind of courage than I ever had. He wrote about calling some of my clients, pretending to be interested in hiring me for a project. Everyone had praised my work, my professionalism, and my genuine care for their businesses. Mrs. Chen from the community center had spent 20 minutes telling him how I'd designed their entire website for free and helped them increase donations by 300%. I spent so many years worrying about your financial security that I forgot to see your strength, he wrote. You don't need my money to succeed, but you deserve to have it anyway. You deserve to know that I'm proud of you. By the time I finished reading, I was crying openly. Mr. Henderson handed me a tissue box and waited patiently for me to compose myself. He came in here 2 days ago, very determined, Mr. Henderson said. He wanted to make sure everything was fair. He said he'd misjudged you terribly. What did he change? Mr. Henderson pulled out the new will. He split everything equally among the 3 of you. The house will be sold, and the proceeds divided. The investments, the savings, everything split 3 ways. He also left you his collection of art books and his old camera. He said you were the only one who would appreciate them. I stared at the documents, unable to process what I was hearing. Equally. But Marcus, Caroline, they were counting on. He spoke to both of them. They were completely supportive of the changes. Marcus said it was the right thing to do. And Caroline said she'd been planning to share her inheritance with you anyway. I thought about my siblings, about how they'd tried to support me after that awful dinner. Maybe I hadn't given them enough credit. "There's one more thing," Mr. Henderson said. He left specific instructions about something he wanted you to have immediately. He handed me a small wooden box that I remembered from Dad's desk. Inside was his father's watch, a simple but elegant timepiece that had been passed down through 3 generations of Thompson men. He said tradition is important, but so is breaking tradition when it's time. He wanted you to have this. I held the watch in my hands, feeling its weight and thinking about all the Thompson men who had worn it before. Dad had broken his own rule about passing it to the eldest son. He'd given it to the child who understood the value of time to create, time to help others, time to build something meaningful. As I drove back to Portland that afternoon, I felt like I was carrying more than just an inheritance. I was carrying my father's recognition, his apology, and his belief in me. It was more valuable than any amount of money, but the real gift was the knowledge that our last conversation didn't have to define our relationship. Even after he was gone, Dad had found a way to tell me that I was enough, that I had always been enough. The funeral was held on a crisp Friday morning in November. St. Mark's Presbyterian Church was packed with Dad's colleagues, neighbors, and old friends, all sharing stories about Robert Thompson's integrity, his work ethic, and his devotion to his family. I sat between Marcus and Caroline in the front row, still processing everything that had happened. During the service, I kept touching the watch in my pocket, feeling its reassuring weight. Pastor Williams spoke about Dad's generous spirit and his quiet acts of kindness that many people never knew about. I learned that he'd been secretly funding a scholarship program at the local community college for years, and that he'd helped 3 different families avoid foreclosure by quietly paying their mortgage payments during tough times. Robert Thompson believed that actions spoke louder than words, Pastor Williams said, and his actions spoke of a man who cared deeply about doing the right thing. After the burial, we gathered at Mom's house for the reception. The same dining room where Dad had delivered his crushing verdict 3 weeks ago was now filled with casseroles, flowers, and people sharing warm memories. I found myself standing by the window, watching the rain fall on the garden Dad had loved so much. "You doing okay?" Marcus appeared beside me, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I keep thinking about that last dinner," I admitted. "I was so angry with him." "He was angry with himself," Marcus said quietly. "Did you know he called me the next day?" I turned to look at him. "He did?" "He asked me about your work, about whether I thought he'd been too harsh. I told him the truth, that you were doing something meaningful, even if it wasn't what he'd expected." Marcus paused, staring out at the rain. "I should have said that at dinner. I should have defended you. You couldn't have known." "Yes, I could have. I've always admired what you do, Bridget. You help people tell their stories. You make small businesses look professional. You give back to your community. I push numbers around and make rich people richer. If anyone's life lacks meaning, it's mine." I'd never heard Marcus talk like this before. He'd always seemed so confident, so sure of his path. "Marcus, you're successful. You've built an amazing career. I've built a career that Dad wanted me to build," he interrupted. "Do you know what I wanted to be when I was a kid? A teacher. I wanted to teach history, maybe coach basketball. But Dad kept talking about financial security, about building wealth, about being practical." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the rain. "I'm thinking about making some changes," Marcus said finally. "Maybe it's time to figure out what I actually want to do with my life." Caroline joined us, looking exhausted but beautiful in her black dress. "What are you 2 talking about so seriously?" "Life choices," Marcus said. "Speaking of which, how are you holding up? I know this whole inheritance situation has been complicated." Caroline glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then pulled us into a quieter corner. "I need to tell you both something. I was never comfortable with Dad's original decision about the will." "You don't have to," I started. "No, I do." That night at dinner, I went home and couldn't sleep. I told David what happened, and he was horrified. We talked about it for hours, and we decided that if Dad didn't change his mind, we were going to give you part of our inheritance. I felt tears prick my eyes. "Caroline, you didn't have to do that." "Of course I did. You're my sister. And honestly, David and I have been talking about this whole thing, and it's made us realize some things about our own lives." "What do you mean?" She looked around the room at all the people eating Mom's food off her good china. "Everyone here is talking about how generous Dad was, how he helped so many people. But I've been living in this bubble, focused on country club events and keeping up appearances. When's the last time I actually helped someone? When's the last time I did something that mattered? And I exchanged glances. It seemed like Dad's death was making all of us question our choices. I've been thinking about going back to school, Caroline continued. Maybe getting a degree in social work or nonprofit management. I want to do something that makes a difference. That's amazing, Caroline, I said, and I meant it. You'd be incredible at that. Thanks. I'm scared, but also excited. David's been so supportive. She paused, looking at both of us. I think Dad would be proud of all of us for asking these questions. Later that evening, after most of the guests had gone home, the three of us sat in the living room with Mom. The house felt different without Dad's presence. Quieter, somehow smaller. I found something in your father's desk, Mom said, pulling out a manila folder. I think you should all see this. Inside were 3 separate letters, each with our names written in Dad's careful handwriting. Mine was dated just 2 days before he died. He must have written these after he changed the will, Mom said softly. I think he wanted to make sure you each knew how he really felt. Marcus opened his letter first. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like relief. He says he's proud of my success, but he hopes I'll find work that fulfills me, not just work that pays well. He says he pushed me toward finance because he was worried about security, but he realizes now that happiness is more important than money. Caroline's letter was similar. Dad had written about how much he admired her dedication to her family, but he encouraged her to pursue her own dreams too. Being a good mother doesn't mean you can't also be other things, he'd written. I hope you'll find ways to use your gifts to help others. My letter was the longest. Dad had written about regretting the years he'd spent criticizing my choices instead of trying to understand them. He'd included a check for the exact amount I'd spent on the art scholarship fund, money he'd somehow found out about. I want to support the work you're already doing, he'd written. Not change it, just support it. You have a generous heart and a gift for helping others tell their stories. The world needs more people like you. As we sat there reading our letters, I realized that Dad's death had given us something unexpected, permission to be ourselves. He'd spent his last days trying to undo years of expectations and judgments, trying to tell us that we were enough just as we were. I have an idea, I said suddenly. What if we didn't just split the inheritance among ourselves? What if we used part of it to start something together? What kind of something? Marcus asked. I don't know yet. Maybe a foundation, or a scholarship fund, or something that helps people pursue their dreams, even when they don't have traditional support. Caroline's eyes lit up. That's perfect. Dad always said actions speak louder than words. This would be action. I love it, Marcus said. And I think I know exactly how to structure it legally and financially. Mom had been quiet through all of this, but now she smiled. The first genuine smile I'd seen from her since Dad died. Your father would love this, she said. He always worried that he'd raised you to compete with each other instead of supporting each other. I think he'd be amazed to see you working together. As we talked late into the night, planning and dreaming, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. A sense of belonging with my family. Not the conditional belonging that depended on meeting expectations, but the deep, unconditional connection that comes from truly knowing and accepting each other. Dad's last gift wasn't just money or possessions. It was the chance for us to discover who we really were and who we could become together. 6 months after Dad's funeral, I stood in the empty storefront in Portland's Alberta Arts District, holding the keys to what would become the Robert Thompson Creative Foundation. The space was perfect. High ceilings, large windows, and enough room for workshops, meetings, and a small gallery to showcase work from the artists and entrepreneurs we'd be supporting. The foundation had been Marcus's idea originally, but all 3 of us had thrown ourselves into making it reality. We'd used 1/3 of our inheritance to fund it, and Marcus had left his job in New York to move to Portland and handle the financial side. Caroline had enrolled in a nonprofit management program at Portland State University and was working on the foundation part-time while she studied. It's perfect, Caroline said, walking through the empty space with her notebook, already sketching out floor plans. We can put the workshop space here, offices in the back, and this front area could be a gallery and community meeting space. Marcus was on his phone with contractors, his expensive suits replaced by jeans and flannel shirts that made him look more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. "The renovation should take about 6 weeks," he said, hanging up. "We could be open by September." The foundation's mission was simple, but ambitious: to provide funding, mentorship, and resources for artists and small business owners who didn't have traditional support systems. We'd offer grants for equipment and education, workshops on business skills and marketing, and a network of mentors who understood what it meant to pursue unconventional paths. I'd been working on our website and marketing materials, but more importantly, I'd been reaching out to potential applicants and mentors. The response had been overwhelming. Artists who'd been working 3 jobs to pay for supplies, immigrants starting businesses without access to traditional loans, young people whose families didn't understand their creative ambitions, all of them eager for the kind of support we were offering. "I got a call from Mrs. Rodriguez today," I told my siblings as we sat in the empty space, eating takeout Thai food on folding chairs. "She wants to refer 3 of her students for our first round of scholarships." "That's great," Caroline said. "I've been meeting with some of the other nonprofit directors in town, and they're all excited about partnering with us. There's a real need for what we're doing." Marcus pulled out his laptop. "I've been crunching numbers, and if we're careful, we can support about 20 artists and entrepreneurs in our first year. Not huge, but it's a start." "Dad would be proud," I said, and for the first time since he died, saying those words didn't make me sad. It made me feel determined. We worked until late that night, planning and organizing, and I realized that this was the first time the 3 of us had ever collaborated on anything. Growing up, we'd always been compared to each other, competing for attention and approval. Now we were working towards something bigger than any of us could accomplish alone. The next morning, I was back at my own apartment, catching up on freelance work to pay the bills while the foundation got off the ground. I'd kept my client base, but I was being more selective about projects, focusing on small businesses and nonprofits that aligned with my values. I was working on a logo for a local food co-op when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Hello? Ms. Thompson. This is Sarah Chen from the Portland Arts Council. I heard about your foundation through the community grapevine, and I wanted to talk to you about a collaboration opportunity." "I'm listening." "We're planning a citywide initiative to support emerging artists, and we think your foundation would be a perfect partner. We have funding available, and we need an organization that understands the real challenges artists face." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling amazed at how quickly things were moving. 6 months ago, I'd been convinced that I was a disappointment to my family. Now, I was part of something that could make a real difference in people's lives. That evening, I met Marcus and Caroline at Mom's house for our weekly dinner. It had become a tradition since Dad died. A way to stay connected and make sure Mom wasn't spending too much time alone. "How was your day?" Mom asked as we sat around the familiar dining room table. "Good," I said, telling them about the call from the Arts Council. "It sounds like we could double our impact in the first year." "That's wonderful," Mom said, and I could see genuine pride in her eyes. "Your father always said you had a gift for bringing people together." "He did?" "Oh yes. He used to tell me about how you'd organize the neighborhood kids to do art projects, or how you'd help the elderly lady next door with her computer. He saw that generosity in you, even when he was too stubborn to tell you directly." Marcus looked up from his phone. "Speaking of bringing people together, I got some interesting news today. Remember Jake Morrison from high school?" I nodded. Jake had been a year ahead of us, a talented musician who'd always struggled with the business side of his art. He's been following our foundation online, and he wants to apply for one of our first grants. He's been working as a music teacher to pay the bills, but he wants to start a program that brings music education to underserved communities. "That's exactly the kind of project we want to support," Caroline said. "Someone who's already making a difference but needs help to do more." As we talked about Jake's project and other potential applicants, I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with Mom's home cooking. This was what family was supposed to feel like. People who supported each other's dreams and worked together to make the world a little better. After dinner, I walked through the neighborhood where I'd grown up, thinking about how much had changed in such a short time. The houses looked the same, but I saw them differently now. Each one represented a family with their own struggles and dreams, their own version of success and disappointment. I stopped in front of Mrs. Rodriguez's house, where a light was on in what I knew was her home studio. She'd been one of my strongest supporters through high school, always encouraging me to pursue art even when everyone else was pushing me toward practical careers. On impulse, I knocked on her door. "Bridget," she said, opening the door with a surprised smile. "What a wonderful surprise. Come in." Her house was filled with artwork. Paintings from her students, her own sculptures, and photographs from decades of teaching. It was the kind of space that celebrated creativity in all its forms. "I wanted to thank you," I said, "for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself, and for talking to my dad about the scholarship fund." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes twinkled. "Your father was so proud when he learned about that. He called me back 3 times to ask more questions about your work with the students." "He did?" "Oh, yes. He said he'd been worried that you weren't building anything lasting. But then he realized you'd been building something all along. You'd been building a community." As I drove home that night, I thought about the word legacy. Dad had been worried about leaving us money, property, things that would last. But his real legacy wasn't the inheritance. It was the lesson he'd taught us about the importance of recognizing and supporting each other's gifts. The foundation was just the beginning. We were building something that would outlast all of us. Something that would help other families avoid the mistakes we'd made. Something that would give people the support they needed to pursue their dreams. I pulled into my apartment complex and sat in the car for a moment, looking up at the lights in the windows. Each one represented someone with a story, someone with dreams, someone who maybe just needed a little support to achieve something amazing. Tomorrow, we'd open the foundation's application process. We'd start reviewing projects, meeting with mentors, and beginning the real work of making a difference. It wasn't going to be easy, but it was going to be worth it. I thought about Dad's letter, about his recognition that success comes in many forms. I thought about Marcus leaving his lucrative career to do something meaningful, about Caroline pursuing her dreams while raising her family, about Mom slowly healing and finding new purpose in supporting our work. We'd all learned that there's more than one way to build a life, more than one way to measure success, and more than one way to leave a mark on the world. Dad's last gift hadn't been money. It had been permission to be ourselves, and the recognition that ourselves were enough. As I walked up to my apartment, I felt my phone buzz with a text from Caroline. "Just submitted our nonprofit certification paperwork. We're officially official." I smiled, thinking about how proud Dad would be. We'd taken his apology and turned it into action, his regret into hope, his love into something that would help others for years to come. The inheritance he'd left us wasn't just money or property. It was the foundation for building the kind of life he'd always wanted for us, even when he didn't know how to say it. And that was worth more than any amount of money could ever be.